Ladies and gentlemen, delve into a tale of deception, betrayal, and the quest for redemption. Join our protagonist as they navigate through a web of lies spun by the very hands they once trusted. Prepare to be captivated by a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about friendship and love. I accepted the invitation to a friend's bachelor party. I drank too much and got caught up in the festivities. I should not have drunk booze. I was aware of the consequences of imbibing and drinking, but I had taken the beverages from my pals without realizing they were plotting my downfall. In my defense, I had not realized it was alcohol. They intended to sell me short to my spouse, not they, however. I had spent my entire life calling this individual my best friend. She craved what I had, and her envy caused my demise. I had accepted drink after drink from her, assuming they were non-alcoholic. I should have tried it. I had blindly trusted someone who I assumed would always be in my corner. Now I was facing a divorce battle, and everything in my life had changed. I desperately need help figuring out how to turn back the clock. Rewind the clock to when bitch and I first became friends. And ensure that it never happened again. I had entrusted this girl with my life. She was meant to be my ride or die, but she suddenly desired what was mine and decided to abandon me. Was this the how friends were meant to act? Never have faith. That is what I will tell you. People on this goddamn internet are never trustworthy. This is what had transpired. I had followed my pal to a bachelor party because she had requested a +1. I'd done it without thinking. I just believed my dearest buddy needed help, so I decided to aid her. I went without informing my husband, who had left on a business vacation. I had babysitters come to my house to care for my son. My husband wouldn't know I'd sneaked out of the house, and my baby would be secure with the babysitters I'd hired. I had no idea. It was all a setup, and I had gone right into the trap. I arrived at the party with my friend who greeted everyone she knew, introducing me to everyone and claiming I was as single as a horse. I told her to stop, but she kept telling the joke. I had left my wedding band at home, which made my friend's joke all the more plausible. Don't get me wrong, I took the band off to take a bath and then forgot to put it back on. I really did not mean to forget to put it on. I had no idea who had been hosting the party. I had just realized it was a bachelor party hosted by a friend's acquaintance to commemorate his last day before getting married. You may be thinking, if this was a bachelor party, so why had non-strippers been invited? Yeah, I was curious about that as well, but my acquaintance goes on to say that the gentleman for whom the bachelor party was being thrown was gay and had no problems with women. My friend was even on his groom train, which is why I was her +1 for the celebration. There was nothing odd about it. There was nothing strange about my best friend's offer to set me up. The celebration had started off low-key with everyone sticking to themselves, but then my betrayer of a best friend, who was always the extrovert, stood up and took over the party. She ensured that everyone was connected with someone in the club. I guess I failed to add that the party was at a nightclub. Everyone started conversing and the drinks began to flow. I didn't want a drink since I knew how it affected me when I did, so when a drink was offered to me, twice I declined. I said I wanted a fruit drink instead, and my best friend offered to go fetch it for me. She said that was the least she could do after dragging me so far out of my comfort zone for a party. Again, I saw nothing odd or strange about the manner she was lingering. She'd been my best buddy. She liked to hover, so I assumed everything was normal. It was the process. I drank what she claimed were mocktails, after I'd asked her about 100 times. It didn't take long for the alcohol to kick in, and everything became blurry. The next thing I knew, I was dancing and everyone was cracking up. I could not find my friend anywhere. It was as if she had vanished from the club, and all I could see were guys. I tried to flee, but the drink had gotten into the part of my brain that processed and interpreted my limb movements, and I remember falling into a guy's lap and laughing so hard because he said, "No, you all The next thing I remember is waking up in someone else's bed with my husband staring down at me from above. I looked around, and my surroundings did not look familiar. So why was I here? I was so perplexed, and my husband had provided no answers, simply shaking his head and walking away from me. I had created the following, LOL. This is when I realized I was completely naked and horror overcame me. It was then that I became aware of the situation and what my husband must have witnessed. I was supposed to be at home caring for our son, but instead I was in an unknown house naked in a stranger's bed, and my husband had caught me. It appeared that I had cheated on my husband, but I had no idea if I had, because I was unaware of what had occurred. I had taken a couple of non-alcoholic drinks and became intoxicated, as evidenced by the appearance of the bedroom. My husband had caught me. God. Back then I had no idea it was all a set-up. I had no idea my best friend had taken me to the house and staged it so that I appeared to have slept with another man. What was on my mind at the time was finding my clothes and running after my husband to explain that he had noticed something wrong. I found my clothes strewn around the room and returned home to find my belongings waiting for me outside, including a phone with an "Open Me" note stuck to it. I turned on my phone and found a video of myself dancing with random men at a bachelor party, being careless and twerking on them while slamming down drinks like a total one. Like I was completely carefree. I had not behaved like a married woman at all. I had acted like a prostitute who had just drank her first wine. I dashed to the door and started banging it down, but after about 30 minutes of knocking, neighbors began to emerge from their homes. I even saw one take out her phone and dial. I had to move. Then I took an Uber to my best friend's house. I began to wonder if my best friend had planned the entire thing. She hadn't called me to ask how I was doing after the party, and she was the only one that knew my whereabouts to call my husband. When I arrived at her house, I expected to confront her, but instead I found her sleeping soundly in her bedroom, still dressed from the night before. It didn't look like she had been plotting my downfall, so I woke her up with force, and she was surprised to see me at her house when she had taken her coffee. And I told her everything that had happened this morning based on how she acted. You wouldn't even have believed her capable of hurting a fly. If only I knew better. If only I hadn't been such a naive fool. My friend had told me that she couldn't remember what had happened on the bachelor party night either. Hell, she even went ahead to say she had no idea how she had gotten home. She was my best friend, and I had known her more than anyone in my life, so I believed her because I had thought that she was the one person that would be led by loyalty to be on my side. I got to witness the stark truth of her betrayal. My best friend told me I could stay at her place while I tried to get myself together and find how to get my husband back. That's what I tried to do. I wanted to get my husband back because I loved him. I wanted to see my son again. I hadn't even been given a chance to see him one last time. I did everything I could think of. I went by his office and demanded an audience with him. But after 3 days of stopping by to see him to no avail, he ordered his security guys to stop me from entering his office building. Whenever I got here, I'd been so embarrassed when 2 guys had to escort me back to my car after a failed attempt to see my husband. When that didn't work, I reduced myself to stalking out the house to watch whenever he got back from work so I could approach him and plead my case. I stayed out, and I hadn't showered for 2 nights just because I was watching my marital home like a spy. My husband got back to the house on the 3rd night of my watch, but my son hadn't been with him. I was stinking, but I had been determined. I ran to him, and before I got to him, he had shut the door in my face. I came by the house the next day and waited till it was dark out and there had been no signs of my husband or son. It was like the place was empty. I went to go and check it out and discovered that the place was indeed empty. My husband had moved out with my son. I broke down in tears that day. My sim was my life, and my husband was still in contact between us. I got back to my best friend's home and she had been waiting for me outside. You guys would kill over if you heard why. My so-called best friend had been waiting for me outside to get back. According to her, I had finished her cereal and she didn't like it, which hadn't even waited for us to get inside her house. She had just laid it out on me right in the yard. I was so mad because of the frustration and yelled at her and this, which ordered me to leave her house, that she had tolerated my ass enough. This was someone who I had taken into my home. If she came into my home, she could have anything she wanted, and here she was taking me out over a finished cereal that I had planned to get a new one. To say I was shocked was an understatement. I was slapped with surprise by her actions, but I guess I should have seen it coming. I really should have seen it coming. During my stay, it was like she was edgy, always wanting to know my every move, always following me around her house and putting back things into place that I had taken even though I put them back. She would claim that I hadn't gotten the positioning right and she had finally had enough, that she wanted to throw me out of her house. I went with my dignity low out. Never in 1,000 years did I expect this from her. I remember when I had become friends with her in high school, when she was a new transfer student eating alone on her table. I had also kind of been a loner in my school, so I had decided to make her my friend so we could be together. We became fast friends. I'm 28 years old, and that means I've been friends with her for more than 11 years. We went to the same college, had been in the same sorority group, and everyone knew us as inseparable friends. This godforsaken fool had also been with me when I had met my husband. I'm half British, so the way I curse is different from you folks, seeing as I had been raised by my grandmother. Let me tell you the funny story of how I met my husband. My husband is 32 years old and studied business analytics at our university, Pepperdine University. However, he had graduated by the time we met through a date. My best friend was the one that was supposed to G you on the date. I know it all sounds cliché, but this was what had happened. She didn't want to go on the date and begged me, even though I also didn't want to go. She begged me to go in her stead, that she would do the chores for a week, and my best friend had hated chores back then, so I knew she really didn't want to go to meet with this guy. I went for the date, and that was how I met my husband. We talked, and although I didn't like him at first, because there was this other guy that had my attention, he was sweet. We exchanged numbers and we talked on occasion and went out randomly. He showed up for my graduation from college, and after a week or two, he asked me to be his girlfriend. This was around 5 or 6 years ago. I decided to go out with him, and my best buddy had no issues about it. She was even strongly behind our relationship and said she had dropped my soulmate straight into my hands. I believe I owed her that much for not going for the date that day. But let me confess, I never really liked my husband. In the first years of dating, he was commanding and always instructed me what to do. It was like he was an alpha boss, and I didn't enjoy someone ordering me what to do. But I stayed. Why I stayed, I have no idea. I just know I did. And after 2 years of dating, he asked me to marry him. Our wedding was amazing and exceptional, and our honeymoon was even more gold. My husband had money and understood how to spend it on people he loved the most, and the amount he spent on me indicated that he loved me. I am not seeking to base my marriage on money, do not get me wrong. Everything was fine in our world. I gave birth to my son 2 years into our marriage, and we tried for a daughter. We gave up after 2 attempts. Yes, God's only gift to me in the shape of children was my son. My hubby had no problems with that either. My marriage with him had been great. There had been some little disagreements, but they were soon settled and we had no problems. I started to adore him when he repeatedly proved that he had my back. I was willing to do everything for him. He assisted my buddies when they were in need. He made anyone I loved his main focus. The man treated me like an eggshell. And then this huge temptation decided to devastate my marriage. Why had I accompanied my best friend to the bachelor party? I could have remained home and watched a fantastic movie. But I was looking for a motel to stay at because my best friend, who had caused all of this in the first place, had tossed me out. I would do everything for that, and if she were in my shoes I would have done anything for her. I did whatever for her, even when she proposed we do something very awful to my husband. I had been by her side supporting her. My best friend had come to me when she had a problem and needed money to fix it, and I had given her money since her mother was in the hospital and her family needed money to pay their rent deposit. I provided her every time she asked, without informing my husband. But that wasn't enough. She had approached me with a business idea, stating that we could open a flower shop and she would keep 100% of the profits while I would receive only 10%. Meanwhile, I was the one who supplied all of the money. I told her I couldn't do it, and she started behaving strangely toward me. This was why, when she phoned me up for the bachelor party, I went with her, thinking we were making up. I believed everything was okay in my friendship world. Again, till she kicked me out of my house. I had no idea this was going to be the least of my troubles. When I attempted to pay for my hotel with my credit card and was denied access, I realized I was in major trouble. This is when I recognized things had gone serious. My husband had restricted all access to his account. That was completely unfair, considering I also had money in that account. How could he have done that to me? I had just bought a new phone, and as I was deciding what to do, my best friend called to say there was someone at her house who wanted to see me. I had to walk to her place because I didn't have the money to pay for an Uber. My predicament was ridiculous, and it hurt me because I had no idea who was to blame. The house in which I awoke did not have an owner. One of the males at the bachelor party was most likely responsible for the alcohol-containing drinks. 2. I had no idea it was my best friend who had done everything till then. I arrived at her residence and discovered my husband's lawyer waiting for me. I was sweaty from the walk, and my best friend had the audacity to laugh at me. It became clear to me that she did not have my best interests in mind. I was an idiot for trusting her. My husband's lawyer handed me divorce papers and informed me that I would no longer have access to any of his accounts and that I would need to sign some paperwork to remove my name from the account beneficiaries list. Then he told me I had to sign over custody of my child to him, which meant I had no claim to my child or his money. I was furious and requested to see my spouse before signing the divorce papers. It was not fair to me that he wanted to do all of this to me without first asking me why or what had happened that night. He was jumping to conclusions and intended to damage my marriage. And the lawyer stated that wasn't possible. And I told him I was not going to give up custody of my child or sign any divorce papers. He was stripping me bare. I didn't have anything more to look forward to in life. My grandmother had died. My son was the only family I had, and my husband wanted to take him away because I was too inebriated to comprehend what I was doing at a party. The lawyer jotted down the address and instructed me to come by the house on the day he would be there, so that we could settle the dispute amicably. Obviously, I did not listen, and that is when the entire truth became clear to me. I visited my husband's house 2 days before the agreed date, and what I saw stunned me to my very core. My closest friend was riding my husband in my marital bed when they noticed me and continued on with it, giving me a sneer while demanding at me to give them some privacy. I wanted to go away from there, but I couldn't. My son wasn't home, and if I'd wanted to run, I would have done it with him. Everything my best friend did and said was replayed in my memory, even how she constantly claimed to have given me my spouse. She felt entitled to his money, how she always assumed she could control me at home, drinks at the bachelor celebration. She had gotten them directly from the bartender, so no one at the bachelor party had placed drugs in them when they eventually made it out. My husband dropped an envelope in front of me, which I opened. This was the moment I Discovered my best buddy had stabbed me in the heart. She stabbed me with a sharp knife, which I will never be able to recover from. It was a DNA test that revealed my youngster was not my husband's. Yes, that was correct, Redditors. But it doesn't matter. Perhaps. It didn't matter back then. He was my husband's son at heart. My husband had been present when I pushed him out and everything. I was in love with another man when I married my husband, and yes, I originally married my husband for financial reasons, but this was not my fault. I needed to experience the luxurious life while still feeling love. I guess I wanted to eat my cake and have it, and I was successful until my best friend ripped open my wound. I tried to get down on my knees and tell him that it hadn't been like that, that I loved him and was willing to do anything for him when he pulled out another envelope and handed it to me. Before you judge me, I was under the mental influence of my best friend and lover. Then they misled me into believing I could steal my husband's money and flee. But I stopped when I realized I loved my husband. I didn't follow through on my best friend's plan to transfer some of my husband's money to an account and then flee. I was the beneficiary of 2 of his accounts, and my husband didn't care what I did with the money. So my best friend devised a plan to transfer some of the money to an unknown account before fleeing. Then we split the money, and I discovered in the envelope the account name and number of the unknown account, as well as a phone recording of our plans. My best friend had made it appear as if it was my idea, and she was simply playing along. There was nothing I could do or say to make myself look better in front of my husband. I begged and begged, but he was unmoved. Had my actions been so brave? I gave him a child, did not I? Even though it was not his, didn't every man want a child? I had just taken the divorce papers and was about to leave when I heard police sirens outside his front door. He had called the police on me despite the fact that I had done nothing wrong. According to him, the only way I could get the police off my back was to sign the divorce papers and give up custody of my son. I signed the documents because I did not want to end up in prison, and I had no idea stealing his money would land me in prison. I hadn't even been thinking. After I signed the divorce papers, my ex-husband revealed that I had been a fool. He did not call back the police, but rather summoned them to arrest me and my best friend. A fitting ending. Some of you may think, but karma was not finished with me. My best friend went into hiding after being questioned for the first time about her fraudulent activities, leaving only me under police scrutiny. Fortunately, I had not done anything and had told them the truth. The account was not in my name, and I received 3 weeks of community service. I had been a victim, and I had learned my lesson well. I hope you guys learn never to trust people. Yes, I had done some pretty terrible things, but I was getting slapped for that now. Hopefully I make it out of this regression period in my life. I want my husband back. Update, I'm good now, and I vowed never to do anyone evil anymore. I'm working for what I have, but I just told my story, so you all would be careful of who you trust. I don't need to get my husband back, but if there's any way I can get suggestions and tips on how to plead to get back into my son's life, that would be much appreciated. Here's the next story. They were right. Liz was there dancing with a man. Dancing is a relative term. It was obvious she was drunk, and I walked over to them, took her hands off his neck, and started pulling her away. Hey, man, what the hell do you think you're doing? Her dance partner asked. She's my wife, and I'm taking her home, I said. Any resistance he wanted to put up immediately ceased. She's all yours, he said. Anyway, when she's drunk, it's no good having fun with her. And when she's sober? I asked, lifting her in my arms to carry her outside. She's great then. Ask anyone. We all think she's one of the best. Someone opened the door for me, and I carried her to my pickup and put her in the passenger seat. It only took a few minutes to get her To my parents' house, where they watched as I unceremoniously dumped her on the bed. She was out like a light. Hell, she was probably passed out from having her ass fondled on the dance floor. I didn't say a word as I left. Ruth was my older sister. She was one of my two sisters. The other was Esther Jacobs. I also have two brothers, Matthew and Luke Reynolds. My name is Mark Reynolds. Our parents were lifelong Southern Baptists. So all 5 of us children were baptized at Citigo Creek in Varna, Tennessee, and grew up attending church every Wednesday night and all Sunday morning. We never had a television, but we did have a radio which was only allowed to play gospel music on Sundays. Of course, when we were away from our parents, or they from us, all the hidden gadgets came out. We tried to keep them out of Mom and Dad's sight, but I'm sure they knew about them. Our parents learned to read so they could read the Bible, and it was the only thing they ever read. We grew up in poverty. All 5 of our children realized early on that they didn't want the same lifestyle as our parents. When each of us graduated from high school, we couldn't wait to leave the North. Ruth and Matthew made it to Nashville. Esther and Luke only made it as far as Madisonville. Neither of them went to college. Ruth always knew how to cook and started working as a cook's aide at a diner. Matthew went to truck driving school where he slipped into a pile of dung and came out of there smelling like a rose. One of the instructors took him under his wing, and after he graduated, the instructor secured him a position as a driver for one of Nashville's megastars. That kind of employment is worth its weight in gold, and normally only older, well-connected, experienced drivers get it. But his instructor had his man. Matthew turned out to be a lot better than average truck driver, and he had a personality that suited him just fine. I was a little different. After high school, I went to Vanderbilt University on a 4-year Army Rock scholarship. And at graduation I obtained the rank of 2nd lieutenant. My first duty after officer basic course was to 8th Army headquarters in Korea. I stayed there for 13 months, following which I came home on a 30-day leave of absence and went to my next military location at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I spent a few days with my folks and then drove to Nashville to visit Ruth. Our brother Matthew was on tour somewhere. He was driving one of several trucks transporting equipment for the star performance. Lights, rigging, everything required to put on a large Nashville show was in the trucks. Ruth had a modest apartment, and I slept on her couch. She was dating a man she had met at a culinary class she had taken at the local community college. His name was Gerald Thompson. Gerald had a sister named Elizabeth, but everyone called her Liz. One night, the 4 of us went out to supper. Then Liz and I went it alone. Then we headed outside again. By the end of my vacation, Liz and I were pretty much in a relationship. Fort Campbell was about an hour distant from Nashville, so I spent a significant amount of time there, and Liz spent a significant amount of time in Campbell. We got married 18 months after we met. Liz was a Nashville native who'd never lived anywhere else. Her father was a urologist, while her mother was a stay-at-home mom. Liz and I completed a 3-year internship at Campbell before being moved to Germany. Germany was a complete cultural shock for both of us. Liz took part in both the Rookie Club and the Officers' Wives Club. She learned how to play bridge and joined the other women on a weekly basis. We also joined a travel club. We traveled to new places every month, including Italy, Switzerland, and Spain. She began to like European wine. In the final months of our 3-year tour, I grew up in a non-drinking family and never developed a taste for booze. Our next assignment was to Fort Campbell, which suited us both. We moved into government quarters and were content for approximately 6 months. Liz then began to spend a lot of time in Nashville. We were going away for the weekend, and she wanted to stay an extra day or so. That amounted to an extra 3 days by the end of the year. She genuinely lived with her parents. I traveled there on weekends. The only indicator of trouble Was that one Friday when I arrived at her parents' place, Liz was not there. They didn't know where she was. I got off early and arrived shortly after lunch. Her mother made excuses for not expecting me so early. I tried to bring my luggage inside Liz's room, but her mother stopped me. Give me the opportunity to clean up first. She said, it's fine. I mentioned that the room was a mess. There were dirty clothing strewn about. I found it unusual that the bed was made up with dirty clothes, yet it was clear that it had not been slept on. The amount of soiled garments piled up indicated that it hadn't been slept on for at least a few nights. Her mother attempted to pick up the soiled clothing. I managed to lead her out of the room by informing her that I needed to use the restroom. Her mother was on the phone, but she hung up as soon as she noticed me. How long has she slept with other men? I asked. I believe that is something we should talk with her. Her mother spoke. Are you coming back? Her mother inquired. I didn't respond and went directly to Ruthie's place. She and Liz's brother had quit dating each other a few years ago, but they remained friends since then. Ruth had met and married a music store owner named Eric Wyndham. Liz and I returned to the States for their wedding. I called Ruth on the way to her house and she informed me where she had hidden the key. We couldn't talk because she was occupied. She did inform me that she wouldn't be at work until midnight because she needed to close the restaurant at her home that night. I tried contacting Liz, but nobody answered, so I left a message. It's your spouse. You know the one man you should be sleeping with. I'd want to hear your argument on why this is no longer the case. I'd also like to know how many others there were and why. Eric arrived home at 7 o'clock and I caught him up. Ruth called shortly after 8. She informed me that she had just received a call from her ex-boyfriend, Liz's brother. He had just learned from a friend that Liz had gotten drunk and was flirting with several men at the Count Monte music bar. He was going to pick her up and drive her home. Ruth reassured him not to worry. I was present and would take care of it. When I flung her onto the bed, both of her parents were present. Her mother began berating me, claiming that everything Liz did was my fault because I took her to Germany, where she learned to drink and do all sorts of bad things. I stared at them both, then walked out and returned to Ruth's house. Eric and I talked until Ruth arrived home and then we all stayed and talked until 3 o'clock. I slept on their couch again. I awoke at 7 a.m., prepared myself a cup of coffee, and sat on the porch of their house, ready to chat to Liz. Ruth and Eric joined me at 9. We spoke for another hour or so. They were curious about what I was going to do, so I told them I had no idea. The next day, it was already 10 o'clock when I called my in-laws. Doorbell. Liz's father opened the door and stood aside, allowing me to enter. Liz was seated on the couch with a cup of coffee. I approached her and dropped my filthy panties on the coffee cup. She picked them up, dropped them on the floor, then raised the cup to her lips and took a sip. Why? I asked. Liz, you do not have to answer that question, honey. Her mother intervened. Stay out of it. I spoke it coldly. Why did you repeat that to Liz? She looked up at me. I needed to feel loved, but you weren't here. How many times did you need to be loved, and I wasn't here? What? How often have you had fun with other men? I do not know. Guess a couple dozen. How many different men? I do not know. Guess 6. Perhaps 7. Perhaps 10. I am not sure. Is our marriage meaningful to you? She lifted her head, looked directly at me, and drank another sip of coffee, answering nothing. I walked out and returned to Ruth. It did not take long to tell her what had occurred, and she did not repent. Didn't you apologize? Asked Ruth. No, she said. That woman is cold-hearted. That is exactly what I thought I said. There was no point in staying in Nashville, so I went to Fort Campbell. It's Sunday afternoon. Liz surprised me when she walked into our house. I stretched out on the couch, and she crouched on the arm beside my feet. She sat like this for a few minutes. "I apologize," she said. "Do not say another word. If the only reason you cheated was that I wasn't available when you needed to have fun, that's pretty pitiful because you refused to leave the house, so I couldn't take care of you or your needs. You chose to drink and sleep with strangers rather than returning home and sleeping with your husband. That's a pretty pathetic reason for destroying a marriage. Your parents are just as guilty as you for allowing you to do it. All you can do now is pack your bags and leave." "I do not want to leave," I apologized. "This won't happen again. I don't care how many times this happens. As far as I am concerned, we are no longer married. So you can do whatever you want with whoever you want. All I care about is that you're leaving." I grabbed the remote and turned on the TV. She snatched it out of my hands and hit the mute button. "I'm not leaving. You're my husband. And this is my home." She tossed the remote back to me and left the room, and she made dinner, and I made a sandwich and ate in the living room. She ate everything she made and stayed in the kitchen. When it was time to go to bed, I took a shower and went to bed. She showered and got into bed, snuggling as close to me as she could. I rolled over. "Do you seriously think we're going to get anywhere after your body has been used by 6, 7, or 10 other men?" I apologized. "And you think that made things better?" "Yes. You are in serious need of help. I can't forbid you to sleep in this bed. But I shouldn't stay here and think about all those men having fun with you." I went into the living room and fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, she was sitting in the chair, watching me. I ignored her, showered, shaved, put on my uniform, and went to work. After reporting back, I spoke to the commander and brought him up to speed. If I were you, the first thing I'd do is contact a lawyer. Take as much time as you need. I talked to several attorneys that day and settled on Kirby Dickinson. He was a retired Army lawyer and knew what military personnel had to deal with. "What do you want from me? And why?" he asked. "I need your advice because I have no idea what I'm doing," I replied. "Do you want to try to save a marriage?" "No." "Why?" "Because she cheated and I won't tolerate a spouse cheating." "How do you know she cheated?" I said to him. "That doesn't mean squat in a court of law, Lieutenant. I was first lieutenant by then. She could tell you and 100 other people she had sex with both the Army and Navy football teams on the 50-yard line with a full stadium watching. Then deny it when she gets in front of a judge. And the judge will believe her unless you have proof." He shook his head. "These are just facts." He paused. "So since you don't want to save your marriage, you want a divorce. Am I correct?" "Yes, sir." "I suppose so. And I suppose you don't want things to be easy for her. Am I correct again?" "Yes, sir." "You're correct again." "Good. I like it when others agree with me. It confirms what I already knew." "And what is that?" "That I am a smart son of a bitch." We both laughed. "This is what I think you should do. If she is living with you, tolerate her in quiet. Ignore her, even if she screams, yells, and throws things at you. If you're lucky, she'll depart and return home to her mother, lover, or anywhere else away from you. When she does, she will most likely revert to her previous adulterous tendencies and seek out someone to sleep with. All we have to do is make sure someone is present to video it when we go to court. Even if the judge says we can't use the recording, he'll understand that you're telling the truth and that your wife did cheat on you. I almost guarantee that he or she will rule in your favor. That's how it works in Kentucky. The disadvantage of this strategy is that someone must be accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to film her antics, and while it may not be inexpensive, I guarantee that it will save you money in the long term. Would you agree? Absolutely. Good. Write a check for my fee, then a check for the detective. I will find. For you. I felt better, but even worse, when I returned to my office. Liz had called me at 6 o'clock that evening, but I did not answer due to Kirby Dickinson's instructions. I entered the house after 10 o'clock. She waited for me. How long will this continue on? She asked. I have apologized. We can now return to normal. I ignored her and went to the shower. 20 minutes later, I was in bed and heard her car drive away. I got up and searched through our shared closet, but practically all of her clothing were gone. I returned to bed and fell asleep. The next morning, I called Kirby Dickinson and informed him that she had probably gone for Nashville. That's great. I have a few acquaintances there. Do you have any clue where she may go? I gave him her parents' address. Okay. It's game on. He stated that it was less than a week later, and I received a video of her having fun with two men 48 hours later. She received paperwork demanding that our marriage be terminated owing to adultery. Less than an hour after obtaining the paperwork, she called and asked me in tears to forgive her. I hung up. I got my employer up to speed. He had been through the same thing a few years before. The difference was that his wife had cheated on him while he was in a combat zone. This is undoubtedly the worst thing a spouse can do. Cheat while a military member is under danger. My next step was to notify post-housing that I was leaving my accommodations. The next day, I moved into the BQ Bachelor officers' quarters. 3 days later, Liz called to say she couldn't get into the house. I told her that it wasn't our house anymore. I moved out since she had abandoned me and I was ineligible for housing as a single officer. But you are not single. Are you married? She said. I giggled as I pressed the call button. I suppose she was back in Nashville. As I already stated, I do not enjoy drinking alcohol. It began with my Southern Baptist background. Even as an adult, I never became addicted to it. It was the same with profanity. I've never gotten used to cussing. Other people were drinking and using vulgar language, which was very usual. They simply weren't for me. Likewise, I am not a prude. Close-up dancing is fantastic. When dancing with your wife or girlfriend, it's also enjoyable to stare at naked or virtually naked women. I admire a woman's body, and if she wants to flaunt it, I'm certainly willing to look that evening. However, I used every four-letter term I had ever heard, as well as ones that I most likely made up while watching a video of my wife having pleasure with two men. I activated the video on my computer. It began with her dancing on the dance floor with two males at once. This continued for several minutes until they exited the dance floor, walked out of the building, and got into their car. The detective followed them to a low-cost one-story motel where the three of them rented a room. Through the window, the detective was able to film the entire process. It was horrible. I didn't watch it for very long. I pressed the pause button. I switched the computer off. I couldn't explain her behavior. She explained that she was doing it because she needed love, and I was not there for her. I had no experience with cheating wives, but that was one of the most flimsy justifications for cheating ever. When I confronted her, she did not even attempt to deny it. That week at work, after seeing some of the film, was a godsend. I was busy all day, every day. As a result, memories of the video faded slightly. Kirby Dickinson called me on Friday to inform me that we had an appointment with her and her attorney on Monday. When I arrived, her parents were with her. I asked Kirby to inform them that we were going to show the video, and that it was best if her parents were not present. He informed Liz's lawyer about it. We saw him speaking with the three of them. Liz shook her head and refused. I heard her say, "I do not believe them." Okay, the gloves were off, and as Kirby had previously stated, game on. It did not take long. Her lawyer demanded that adultery be removed as a cause of divorce. Mental cruelty should take its place because I had caused her so much mental anguish that she could not be around me. This is why she was forced to live with her parents. Kirby and I looked at each other. My computer was on my desk, and the video was playing exactly where I had left it. I looked at them all. Elizabeth, I told you I only called her that on rare occasions to get her attention. Are you certain you want your parents to see it? What do you see? Me holding hands with a guy or dancing with him? You choose whichever is better. I pressed play, and the entire room saw it. Her mother had passed out, and her father was trying to wake her up while glancing at his daughter. When the mother came to her senses, her father looked at her. I want you out of our home today. He and his wife were fine with her cheating until they discovered the extent of her debauchery. He carefully helped his wife up and began to exit the room. When he got to me, he came to a stop. You should not have done that, you understand? Would you have believed me otherwise? I asked. No, probably not. But there could have been a better way. There was. It was unnecessary to deceive your daughter. We never heard from them again. Liz and her lawyer did not appear at the trial, which was scheduled. 6 weeks later, I was a free man, with all of our meager belongings and no child support. 6 more weeks, and I was told to go play sand trap in the Middle East. I spent 2 days with Ruth and her husband before returning home to spend time with my parents and other siblings. I drove my truck to my parents' house and left it for my father to use and watch over while I was away. Matthew was currently on another tour with his megastar. My 2 other siblings were still in Madisonville. Both were married with children. I survived my year in the sand trap with nothing but unpleasant memories. However, I returned with the rank of captain, which was nice. My new assignment took me to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where I commanded a garrison at the Command and General Staff College. It was an elective assignment for any captain, but to be assigned there as a very junior captain with no command experience was a mistake. I even called my office in Washington to confirm this. Are you complaining, Captain Reynolds? Because if so, there are a couple hundred other captains who would be happy to take your place. No, I'm perfectly happy. I just wanted to make sure someone wouldn't notice the mistake and reassign me in 3 months. No, Captain Reynolds, you're locked up for 3 years. Unless, of course, we need you back in the sand trap. If that happens, you can send one of those couple hundred other captains you mentioned in my place. We both left. It didn't take me long to get into a nice, steady rhythm. Of course, it didn't hurt that I had an experienced first sergeant doing everything for me. One Saturday, I was in the auto repair shop on post. It had facilities and equipment for minor repairs to our personal vehicles. There was even an experienced mechanic there to help those who needed it. I wasn't an expert, but I had grown up in the countryside. I knew the difference between a spark plug and a nut, so I was quite capable of doing it myself. There weren't many people around when I arrived, so I started the oil change. There were 3 pits to change the oil and work under the car. I had been in my pit for about 5 minutes when another car pulled into the pit next to me. I didn't pay attention to it until I heard it. Goddamn piece of shit. It came in a soft but determined female voice. It got quiet again until the wrench fell and hit the concrete floor. Oops. Damn it, I heard. I grinned to myself and decided that maybe the voice needed help. I tightened the drain plug and climbed the steps out of the pit. I walked down the steps to the pit next to mine. She was wearing a jumpsuit 2 sizes larger. Do you need help? I asked. She turned to look at me, and I could see that underneath the layer of oil was an attractive face. She spit out a mouthful of oil and looked at me. What makes you think I need help? Because I'm a woman and women don't know how to change oil. Well, no. It just seemed to me that you were upset and I thought I could help. No thanks. I know what I'm doing. I just hate this piece of shit. Okay. Have a good day. I went to my car, put oil in it, and drove away, never seeing her again. The next week I was at a cocktail party the Commander General was throwing. I was invited. Only because I was the garrison commander, not because I was part of the rare atmosphere of 3 generals and countless colonels serving at Fort Leavenworth. I bought some cocaine and wandered around wondering if there were any other officers of my age and rank with whom I had anything in common. I didn't expect to find any, and I wasn't disappointed. I looked at my watch and decided that from a protocol standpoint, I had another 15 minutes before I could gracefully exit the backyard. Looked like a promising place, and I headed that way. I was on my way out the door when I heard a voice. Anyway, my dad made me learn how to do things on my own in case I ever found myself in a pinch, so I decided to change the oil myself. It took me over an hour, and I had oil from my hair to my fingernails, including my mouth. I even spilled it on the manual, which made it almost impossible to read. But the worst part was that this incredibly cute guy offered to help me, and I said I didn't need anything. If I had any common sense, I would have asked for help just to get his name and phone number. The group she was with all laughed until another female voice spoke up. What do you mean? You'd ask for his name and phone number? You've never done that before. I understand. But there was something about his face that made me. I don't know. I can't fully explain it. There was just something about him. And I saw it. Even though I was angry and upset. Wow. He must have been something unique. I guess so. So I grinned to myself and tried to look at the person I was talking to. I wanted to see what she looked like without the oil. I strolled through the patio doors and looked left, then right. There were 3 women standing to my right. One of them was about my age. Maybe a couple of years younger, but who knows? Our eyes met for the briefest of moments. Following which I turned and walked back into the home. I knew she recognized me. I found a nook where I could stand back and watch. The 3 women stepped inside and instantly made for the front door. In most military residences, right outside the front door is a stand with a cup, saucer, or metal tray where military guests leave one of their business cards with their name and rank. And you left one every time you were a guest in the house. The women approached the tray of business cards and began sorting through them, eventually finding one. They gathered around each other to inspect it before looking at me. I tried to be as discreet as possible, but I was the only company grade officer, 2nd lieutenant, 1st lieutenant, or captain in a home full of field-grade officers. Major and above was extremely entertaining. They would have no issue determining which card was mine. I was in uniform and the only officer below major. All they had to do was go through all the cards until they found mine. Plus the name tag on my uniform, Reynolds said in huge letters. I was trying to determine whether I should ask her about the car, thereby identifying myself, or wait and see what they, or rather she were going to do. I hadn't been on a real date in a long time when my mental protocol timer went off. I approached the hostess, Major General Morris T. Woodley's wife, and thanked her for a beautiful evening. My hat was the only one on the table without an egg gold braid on the bill, so it was easy to find. I cast a furtive peek at the 3 women who were also watching me. The mystery lady and I shared 2 things in common. First, the general's party, then the machine shop. I couldn't wait around the general's house, hoping she'd come up, but I could hang out at the machine shop on Saturday morning where I was washing and waxing my truck. I took my time and was about finished when I noticed her car pull up to the home. She climbed out of the car, but she wasn't wearing overalls. She wore pants and a white t-shirt with gold sequins on the front. My pickup was parked inside the facility while she parked outside. She stepped out of the truck and was moving towards me when she was stopped by a man I knew as a Boku major. He began talking to her, and she appeared to want to go away, but he kept her engaged in the conversation. We held each other's sight for a full second before I looked away. I was finished, and there were already 2 others waiting for my spot, so I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to leave. Her gaze remained fixed on me as I got into my pickup and drove away. I pulled to the side of the road and waited. Less than 5 minutes later I noticed her coming toward me, so as the army's march I turned off the road and went to the post office. It was packed, and I had to park rather far from the entrance. There were several allocated parking spaces near the entrance. The one nearest to the door explained that it was allocated for the Commander General. Her car was parked in that location. I nearly turned around and drove home. Fortunately, I didn't. When I walked in, she was standing directly in front of the entrance, playing hard to get. It was the first thing she said, and she said it with a smile. "No, why are you trying to get me?" She laughed aloud. "That is a fascinating question. I am not sure. Can you be caught?" "Maybe, but I am not cheap." She pointed to the snack kiosk at the end of the corridor. "Is a Coke okay?" It was my time to laugh. "Unless you're expecting too much from the kiosk, we each got a Coke." She had a diet one and paid for both. We sat down at a table, and 3 hours passed by. Her phone had rung at least 6 times. However, she paid little attention to it. Finally, she looked at her watch and leaped up. "Shit! I've got a date. I have to go." I stood up. "Who is playing hard to get now?" We walked to her car, and she drove off for her date. I hadn't eaten dinner at a fine restaurant in a while, so I went to the officers' club. The prime rib was outstanding. I walked into my block, sat around for a while, showered, changed into my civilian outfit, and headed to the club. The dining room was closed due to the party, but the grill remained open. So I sat down and ate. After eating, I went to the door, and as I walked by, I glanced into the dining room from the doorway. The Major from Boku and I were dancing close together. When I realized I hadn't known her name the entire time we had been conversing. I had never asked her name, and she had never offered it. I stood and watched them dance until another couple knocked into them, at which point she looked at me. I turned and went for the door. The block club was a short walk away, so I went there. There was a huge lobby with 2 enormous televisions, a bar, and a snack table stocked with officers' club. I sat there, drank Coke, and watched NASCAR reruns. I'd been there for approximately 2 hours and was about to head to my room when the Major strolled in. He fetched himself a beer and sat in the large chair next to mine. He inquired about the race, and I said that I had paid no attention to it. "You're the garrison commander, correct?" he asked. "Yes." He reached out his hand. "Ernie Bigelow, following G3 Operations Division. Mark Reynolds. You already know where I work." We sat and spoke. He was a pleasant, polite individual who was easy to chat to, so after a time I said to him that I had seen him dancing earlier at the club. "Your date appeared familiar." He grinned. "She should. General Woodley's daughter, Christina. Not to go too personal, but do you have feelings for her?" I asked. He laughed. "Hell no. Nobody has anything to do with Miss Iceberg. I've met her a few times, and every time I thought I'd make it to first base, she'd stop me at the knees. So why do you keep coming back?" I asked again. "I do not know either. I'm trying to unfreeze her, or I'm a glutton." He stared at me. "It's interesting you're asking me who she is because she saw you tonight and asked whether I recognized you." He laughed. Not wanting any more competition, I told her I didn't know Ernie Bigelow, and we became friends. 3 days later, Christina Woodley called to invite me to dinner. I accepted. That following evening, I was seated in the back lobby with Ernie next to me. He stared at me. "I heard you had a date with Christina." "Yes, Fridays. Meal." "How did you know?" I called and asked her out. She was not bashful about informing me that she had a date, and with whom. Or is it who? That was surprising to me. I mentioned that she remembers her phone number quite well. Would you mind sharing how you acquired it? I do not have it. She did not give it to me. So how did you ask her out? It's not like you can simply stroll up and knock on her door. I stammered. I did not ask her out. She called and asked me directly. I didn't consider how she got my number. She knew my name from the business card I had left at her house, and she had access to the postal phone book. Simple as that. He looked at me and began laughing. Well, I will be damned. I've known her for nearly 2 years and she has never asked a guy out. You must be special. I don't know about that. Look, she goes on dates, but not very often since I've been here. She has only dated me and 2 others. We're a close-knit group and we keep an eye on each other, waiting to hear if either of us has made any progress. For now, she can only do a few close, slow dances and a couple of cheek kisses. We sat and talked and, as I mentioned, became friends. He sincerely wished me luck with Christina. Just keep me updated and I'll let the other 2 know about you and your progress. Our dinner date went well. So well, in fact, that I invited her out and so on. Ernie found out he was being transferred to Korea and offered to take her to a farewell dinner, but she declined. He quoted her exact words as, "I like Mark Ernie. I really like him and I don't want to put him in danger." I always took her out on dates and socialized with both of her parents. They did not hate me, but they also did not welcome me with open arms. In the 7th month of our acquaintance, I received orders to return to the Middle Eastern sandbox. I called my unit and inquired about it. I assumed I had a 3-year stabilized tour. I told my assignment manager your name was Mark, but you must have irritated someone because we have been instructed to reassign you immediately. You're due to arrive in the country in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Everyone gets at least 30 days. I called Christina. She was even more upset than I was. We talked for a few more minutes, and when we were done talking, she said, "I love you, Mark." She had never said that before. At 9 o'clock the next evening, I was packed and ready to leave the next morning. Christina was going to stop by to say goodbye. There was a knock on my door. I opened it and it was her. She put her arms around me and we kissed. "My dad did it," she announced. "Did what? Sent you away? Why?" "He knows how I feel about you. And he's afraid he'll lose me. He will eventually. Me or someone else." "What do you mean by someone else?" "We don't have anyone else. Eventually will if I don't come back." She hugged me. Again. "Don't say that." She pulled away and looked at me. "Marry me," she said. "What?" "Marry me. It'll fix him." I laughed. "Marrying me just to piss off your father is no reason to get married." She pulled away from me and lowered herself into a chair. "Then I'll stay here tonight. That will make him very angry." I laughed again. "I'd love to stay the night with you, but you just had a fight with your father. Where do you think he'll send the first thing if you don't come home? Then let's go to a motel outside the post." I knelt in front of her. "I love you. Our first night together won't be a night of revenge or hiding. We will hold our heads up proudly and declare our love to the whole world." She took my face in her hands, kissed me and laughed. "I've already done that. Everyone in Leavenworth knows I love you, eh? Especially my father. That's why he reassigned you." We sat huddled together in the chair. The problem was that I loved her and wanted our first time to be perfect. And it wasn't. We were kissing when her phone rang. "Hi, Mom," she said, putting it on speaker. "Where are you?" I heard her mother ask at the block with Mark. "When are you coming home?" "When Mark goes tomorrow." She looked at me and grinned. There was a sudden intake of breath. You know your father is going to kill you both, don't you? He already did, Mom, when he transferred Mark. What should I tell him? Tell him I'm grown up and I'll do what I want. Goodbye, Mom. You know the cops are probably on their way. I stated I didn't care. That's because you'll just go home while I go to jail. She rushed herself into my arms. We hugged and kissed for quite a while. Then she stared into my eyes. I love you. You are aware of this. I have never been in love before, and I'm sure you love me. Do you want to know how I know this? Yes, I answered. You have made no attempt to proceed any farther. That demonstrates that you value me. And don't rush anything. We both know it's going to happen. You will be the first man to do it. Alongside me. The next morning, I waited for Major General Second Rank Woodley when he got to his headquarters. When his driver pulled up, I was already opened the door for him when he noticed me. He was astonished. Naturally, he recognized me. Why are you here, Captain? He asked. I'm here to inform you that I think you're a cowardly father. You may be a good general, but you're a terrible father. You can send me any place, even the federal penitentiary on the other side of this facility. But I will keep my word. I adore your daughter, and she says she loves me. This is probably novel to you because if I understand correctly, she has never been in love before, and that scares you because one day you'll lose her to another man. It may be Ernie Bigelow, a private in a military camp, or a civilian doctor, but one day you'll lose her. And when you do, I hope it's as painful for you as it was for her when you flung your weight around and moved me when you see her for dinner tonight. I want you to gaze at her knowing you have broken her heart. Because you did. She could easily forget about me for the next year, which I am sure is exactly what you desire. However, she will fall in love again, probably one more time, and each time you'll lose more of her until she despises you. I didn't even greet him as I left. I completely anticipated to be arrested after leaving my post, but it did not happen. I drove to my sister Ruth's residence and then to my parents' home. I planned to leave my truck at their location for the duration of my absence. I put my few personal possessions in storage. I spent one day at Ruth's residence during my visit with them. She brought me up to date on my ex-wife. Her parents disowned her after seeing a video of her with two men. Never spoke with her again. Her brother, Ruth's former boyfriend, disowned her after she walked out of their house. She has been jailed at least 3 times for prostitution and drug dealing and is currently in jail. After leaving Ruth, I spent 3 days with my folks. I spoke with Christine several times before leaving and heard that the day I left Leavenworth, she had moved out of her parents' house and into a furnished apartment in town. Much to the chagrin of her father. She refused to speak with him, and her mother claims he wasn't sure whether to be angry or offended. So he did both. I arrived at my departure point and checked in. The sergeant behind the counter looked at my orders, bowed, and went to the office behind his back. A few minutes later he returned with the first lieutenant. "Excuse me, Captain Reynolds, but could you please enter my office?" I followed him inside. "Have a seat, Captain." He paused to collect his thoughts. "Your orders have changed. It appears that your original order was processed incorrectly. Fort Leavenworth is conducting an investigation to determine what happened. But here are your new orders. You are to report to Leavenworth and resume your previous duties." He threw up his hands. "I've never seen anything like it. I've seen orders changed, but never one in which a serviceman returned to his previous duties. To top it all off, we received this letter yesterday via personal courier who was supposed to deliver it to you in your hands. It was a sealed envelope with the return address of 2 General Command in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The lieutenant gave me my new orders. Congratulations, Captain, you're going home. I went outside to open the envelope. You were correct. That is all it said. It was signed Anne Woodley. I took out my cell phone and called Christina. She answered the first ring. Where are you? On my way home. Do you know my orders got cancelled? You're kidding. What happened? Apparently your father changed his mind. I'm going back to Leavenworth. My goodness. How soon can you get here? In a couple of days. I have to stop and pick up my truck and then I'll go from there. Hurry up, honey. I'll start looking for a bigger apartment. The drive back broke all records. We'd been on the phone constantly for the last 50 miles, and she was running toward me when I turned onto the street where she had an apartment. The truck barely had time to stop before I jumped out of it and found myself in her arms. We kissed and cuddled as the vehicle drove around us. Military towns are used to reunions with loved ones happening in unusual places, and it took a few minutes before we calmed down and went inside, where we kissed and cuddled for another long time. After the passion subsided, we sat next to each other on her couch and talked. She talked to her mother, but not to her father. Her mother did not know that my order had been changed, but when she was informed of it, was happy for her daughter. I showed her the short note I had received from her father. What does it mean? She asked. I told her about my meeting with him the morning I left. I'm surprised he didn't put you in jail for talking to him like that, she said. Me neither. I'm sure it went against everything he holds sacred to change your orders, she said. He didn't do it for me. He did it for you because he loves you, and it's hard for him to accept that he's no longer the only man in your life. She looked at me with love in her eyes. I looked around, stood up, and grabbed out of my pocket the ring I bought in Tennessee. When I stopped by to pick up my truck, I got down on one knee before I could utter a word. She was crying. Christina, Louise Woodley, will you marry me? She promptly sank to her knees, stuck out her left hand, and said, put that on my finger, once the ring was where it would be for the following 50 years. She spoke again. Yes. Mark Hadley. Reynolds, I will marry you and adore you till the day I die. Every man thinks their wife or girlfriend is the most gorgeous, flawless creature on earth. And I was no exception. I asked her if she wanted to go to a high-class hotel for our first night together, but she replied in the negative. Our first home is this apartment. I want our first time to be in our own home. She had time to prepare for my homecoming, and she did it in her own unique style for our first dinner in this apartment. We had champagne, patties, and chocolate-covered strawberries. I even drank some champagne. We sat on the bed, eating and drinking, but soon got down to business. We were awakened by her phone at 10 a.m. Hello, Mom, said pleasantly, as she always did. She said it to speakerphone. Good morning. Did you hear from Mark? Wasn't he supposed to return today? She looked at me and smiled heartily. He arrived home yesterday night and spent the night with me. Mom. Okay. Then he asked me to marry him, Mother. So I said yes. We could see her face light up. That is fantastic. When will the day come? Christina laughed. We do not know yet. We thought we'd talk about it with you and Daddy tonight over supper. Is this good with you? This was news to me, so I just gazed at her with wide eyes, convinced she was insane. She looked at me and winked. That would be excellent. What kind of wine does he prefer? He doesn't drink very much, but he will join us for some champagne. Okay. I will meet you at 630. Is this good with you? Great. See you then. Should I tell your father, or would you want to do it yourself? You can inform him if you believe he can handle it. Otherwise, let Mark handle it. We rang the doorbell at 630. The door was opened by her father. Why did you press the doorbell? Do you have a key? He spoke to his daughter. I understand, but I don't live here anymore, Dad. I watched him flinch, but his face brightened when his daughter hugged him and kissed his cheek. She whispered, "Thank you," as she kissed him. It was not simple for him. I shook his hand. After he extended it to me. "Let's get started with dinner," he said. We were in the tiny family dining room, not the one used for large dinner parties. Christina and I seated opposite sides of the table. Champagne had already been poured. "Dad, Mom. Mark has something to say." I took a deep breath. "First and foremost, General Woodley, I would want to thank you for your assistance in rescinding my orders." I said it in those terms, knowing full well that he was solely responsible for issuing and then rescinding the instructions. "Second, General Woodley and Mrs., I want you to know that I adore your daughter and have proposed to her." And I said yes. Christina spoke, extending her hand first to her mother and then to her father. Her mother exclaimed and rejoiced. Her father, I'm sure, was advised to accept it gracefully and not make a fool of himself. He was gracious enough to propose a toast. After dinner, the two women went somewhere to begin making wedding plans. The General and I proceeded to the library and he poured 2 glasses of port wine. "I understand you only consume alcohol on exceptional occasions. I believe there will be 2 of them in one evening." I took a small glass. "Congratulations, Mark. You've done something I never wanted to witness." He took a short sip and motioned for us both to seat. I expected it to come sooner or later, but he changed his tone when he spoke again. "You were correct when you criticized me. I believed I understood what was best for my daughter. But when I saw how she looked at you during dinner, I realized I was mistaken. All I ask is that you care for and love her for the rest of her life, just as you do now. You can bank on it, sir. I would never intentionally do anything to harm her." I believe he was looking at me. "But there is one thing I'm having difficulty with." "What is that, sir?" "I don't like the fact that you're living together before marriage." Christina had apparently told him this. "You have no choice, sir." I didn't think so, but I decided to give it a try. Christina's father retired 6 months after that dinner and took over as general manager of a major automaker's parts purchasing division. 2 months later, Christina and I married. She was clearly pregnant as she walked down the aisle. My brother Matthew arrived with his megastar from Nashville who performed an impromptu show at our reception. He handed Christina's parents copies of all of his CDs. Matthew explained that my parents only listened to gospel music, so he gave them copies of his gospel records. The day we returned from our honeymoon, I received a call from Ernie Bigelow. He congratulated me and informed me that he had won $2,000 from 2 other men who were dating Christina. They had bet him that I would fall on my face, just like them. Ernie disagreed with them and took some of the money. 2 months after the wedding, Jason Richard Reynolds was born. 6 months later, I quit my job and began working for my father-in-law almost as soon as he started walking. Jason clung to his grandfather and the two became best friends. My father was always envious whenever we took Jason to see my parents during one of our trips to Tennessee. My sister Ruth brought me up to speed on my ex-wife. Turns out, after getting out of prison, she had gotten into a questionable business. One of her best-selling movies was a recreation of her session with 2 men and her first experience. All was going well until it was discovered that she was mailing some of her artwork through the mail. The federal government looks the other way, so she sits 3 to 5. One weekend, Jason was with Woodley's grandparents at their lake house. Christina and I were home alone, snuggled up against each other on the couch, watching some kind of movie. She turned to me. "Mark?" "Yes." "Do you like being a father?" "Sure." "Why would you like another baby?" I leaned back and gazed at her. "What are you trying to say? That you're Pregnant? No, but I'd want. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, write a comment below with your thoughts on what transpired. Take care.